It is a warm afternoon at Ashridge. Sunlight rests on the lawns, leaves move along the edge of the woods, and the English summer seems to fill every open space. Near the little Gaddesden in Hertfordshire, the estate stretches across a landscape of trees, grass, and old buildings. Yet somewhere under this sunlit ground, winter is waiting in the dark. The entrance is easy to pass without understanding what lies beyond it. Behind the modest opening, a narrow passage leads down into an ice house built to hold the cold long after the ponds had thawed. Ice gathered during winter was carried here and packed beneath the earth. Months later, while warm air moved across the estate, part of that frozen season could still be brought back into daylight. Before mechanical refrigeration, cold was something people collected. Weather made it. Workers lifted it from local ponds, carried it across the grounds, and placed it inside a building shaped to slow its disappearance. The ice house did not create winter. It gave winter a place to remain. For a moment, stay outside with the summer light. The hidden chamber is close, but almost nothing on the surface reveals its depth. Earth and vegetation soften its outline. The estate continues around it, as if the seasons have kept their usual order. This is the quiet mystery at the heart of Ashridge. The warmest part of the year can pass over a store built from the coldest. A visitor may stand only a few steps from the entrance and still see nothing of the deep chamber below. The landscape keeps the secret in plain sight, summer on the surface, winter beneath it. Then the doorway darkens, the edge of the landscape. Beyond it waits a different kind of room, deep, enclosed, and built around a store of ice. Our journey begins in summer, but every step toward that entrance carries us back toward winter. As the entrance draws closer, the wide estate falls away behind us. The opening is not grand. It was made for work, not ceremony. A confined passage reaches into the ground, leading toward a chamber that is mostly hidden below the surface. The route once passed through 3 doors. Each door created another pause between summer air and the colder space within. Open one, move forward, close it again. The sequence turned a short walk into a series of protected thresholds. Warm air could not rush straight from the lawn to the stored ice every time someone entered. The passage also changed the scale of the world. Outside, the eye could travel across fields and trees. Inside, attention narrowed to masonry, timber, and the path ahead. Earth pressed around the structure. The chamber waited farther down beneath a domed vault, its storage space tapering into the ground. No surviving account tells us exactly how this approach felt on a particular day. The precise light, temperature, and sound are gone. What survives is the shape of the system: a covered entrance, several doors, a narrow route, and a deep room separated from the weather above. That shape is enough to guide us inward. The doorway closes behind the imagined visitor. Daylight becomes distant, and the architecture begins its quiet work. Every foot of earth, every layer of masonry, and every closed threshold adds distance between the summer afternoon and the winter stored below. To fill the chamber, the estate had to wait for winter. Local ponds were part of the supply, and snow could be gathered with the ice. The work began when cold weather had held long enough for water to harden into something that could be cut, lifted, and carried. Estate workers watched the season closely. Too early, and the ice would not be ready. Too late, and a thaw could weaken what winter had made. When the time came, hands and tools moved out across the frozen ground. The surface of a pond became a temporary harvest. The workers remain unnamed, but the rhythm of their labor is easy to follow. Ice had to be separated into manageable pieces, raised from the pond, and moved away from the water. Snow could be collected as well. Each load began a journey across the estate toward the buried entrance. Cold alone was not enough. The weather supplied the material, but people supplied timing, strength, and organization. They returned again and again, turning a brief stretch of winter into a reserve, meant to last through warmer months. From the pond, the ice house may have seemed far away, hidden among the grounds. Yet the two places belonged to the same design. One produced the ice, the other protected it. Between them ran a path of repeated trips, heavy loads, and doors open for the season's work. The frozen surface would eventually soften and disappear. By then, some of its winter had already left the pond. It was on its way underground. Every piece of ice had to cross the distance between open water and the hidden chamber. That movement is the human center of the story. Cold became useful only because workers could lift it, contain it, and keep it moving. Imagine the route as a steady procession rather than a single dramatic moment. A load leaves the pond. Boots find their way over winter ground. Weight shifts from hand to hand. The entrance comes into view, and the open landscape narrows toward the passage. The details of the carts, containers, and exact route are not preserved here, so the journey must remain simple. What matters is the transfer itself. Ice from local ponds and gathered snow reached the Ashridge Ice House, where separate loads could become one protected mass. At the entrance, the building changed from a sealed store into an active workplace. Doors that normally held warmer air at a distance now had to open again and again. Workers carried winter through the thresholds, moving from the pale outdoor landscape into the confined masonry passage. This was seasonal labor with a deadline. Each trip depended on cold weather still holding. Ice exposed to the air had already begun its slow return to water. The sooner it reached the chamber and joined the larger store, the better its chance of surviving. By the end of the route, the material had crossed more than physical ground. It had moved from weather into architecture, from a temporary frozen surface into a space prepared to extend its life. The pond made the ice. The workers gave it direction. Inside the ice house, the loads did not remain as a loose collection of separate blocks. Ice and snow were packed together until they formed a solid mass. The chamber slowly filled from an empty masonry vessel into a dense reserve of winter. One load arrived, then another. Gaps narrowed. Snow settled between harder pieces. The growing mass exposed less surface than the same amount scattered across an open floor. Depth became part of the protection. The work demanded repetition. Workers passed through the entrance, moved along the passage, and added what they carried to the store below. Doors opened for them and closed behind them. The chamber accepted the season piece by piece. There is no need to invent a single day when all of this happened. Filling an ice house belonged to a routine shaped by weather and available labor. The process could continue as long as winter provided material worth saving. When the store was ready, the building returned to stillness. The passage was cleared. The doors could remain closed for longer stretches. Earth surrounded the chamber, and the packed ice rested within its deep enclosure. Nothing about the arrangement promised that every piece would survive. Some melting was unavoidable. The goal was to make loss slow enough that a useful supply remained when the lawns were green again. The final load joined the others and disappeared into the larger mass. Outside, winter continued on its way. Inside, the season had been gathered into one place, waiting for the months ahead. The Ashridge chamber is deep and tapering, with a domed vault above it. Its form brings the stored ice together inside a volume protected by masonry and earth. The room is less like an ordinary cellar than a vessel sunk into the ground. From the passage, the chamber opens into depth. The upper access point stays close to the route outside, while the storage space falls away below. This vertical arrangement explains why later workers needed more than a simple set of steps to reach the ice. The dome closes the room overhead. Curved masonry carries the space above the store, while the tapering walls hold the mass below. Much of the structure remains beneath the landscape, where the surrounding ground adds thickness between the ice and summer air. English ice houses did not all share one design. Other surviving examples include different chamber shapes and different combinations of materials. Ashridge belongs to that larger tradition, but its own documented form remains the center of this journey. Other sites help us understand the type. They do not supply missing pieces for this building. Inside Ashridge, the architecture can be read almost like a sequence of instructions. Keep the store deep. Limit the opening. Place barriers along the approach. Use the surrounding earth. Give melting water a way to leave. The room contains no unnecessary grandeur. Its beauty comes from purpose. The curve of the vault, the narrowing walls, and the darkness below all serve a practical effort, holding a winter mass together while the season above moves on. Once the doors were closed, the ice house worked through delay. Heat still moved inward, and ice still melted, but the building made both processes slower. Earth covered much of the structure. Cavity construction added separation within the walls. 3 doors once divided the entrance into stages. The chamber held the ice in a deep, compact mass. No single feature carried the whole task. Together, they placed layer after layer between the store and the changing weather. The doors mattered whenever someone entered. A worker could pass one threshold before opening the next, limiting the direct exchange of air. After the visit, each barrier could be closed again. An ordinary action, repeated carefully, became part of preservation. The mass of ice also protected itself. A compact store exposed less of its surface than many small pieces spread apart. The outer areas could absorb heat while colder material remained deeper within. Openings in the cavity construction are interpreted as a way for meltwater to escape. That water was a sign of loss, but letting it drain kept it from simply collecting around the remaining ice. The system did not prevent change. It managed change. Most of this work was nearly invisible. Earth did not move. Closed doors looked still. Masonry held its place. The important action unfolded across days and weeks, measured by how slowly the stored mass became smaller. The ice house succeeded through patience. It stretched the usefulness of winter, not by freezing time, but by making time pass more gently around the ice. Across England, ice houses answered the same seasonal problem in different ways. Some used thick brick or stone. Straw or sawdust could add insulation. Passages, multiple doors, and drainage appeared in varied arrangements. Chambers could be cylindrical, conical, or pear-shaped. These examples help place Ashridge in a broader tradition, but they remain separate places. Ickworth has its own documented form. Cleveland Row carries its own uncertainties. Park Crescent belonged to a commercial urban setting rather than the daily life of this country estate. The comparison is brief because Ashridge does not need borrow details. Its deep tapering chamber, domed vault, narrow passage, earth cover, doors, and retrieval equipment already tell a complete story of local choices. Variation is part of what makes these buildings interesting. There was no single perfect icy house copied everywhere. Builders adapted a shared idea to different ground, materials, and needs. The aim remained familiar. Gather winter cold, protect it, and make it available later. Then the wider view closes, and we return to the chamber beneath Ashridge. The other sites fade back into their own landscapes. Here, the doors are shut. The ice rests in its compact mass. Summer is approaching, and the building is ready for the next part of its work. When ice was needed, the quiet chamber became a workplace again. At Ashridge, the surviving description gives us a remarkable set of tools: a pick, a bucket, a pulley, and a suspended chair. Together, they show how a worker reached the compacted store below. The opening waited above the ice. A rope passed through the pulley. The chair supported the worker as he was lowered into the chamber. His name is gone, though the work remains visible in every part of the arrangement. Hands checked the rope. Boots settled into position. The descent followed the vertical shape of the room, moving from the upper access point toward the stored mass. Above, another worker could help manage the line and the load. Once close enough, the lowered worker used a pick to break away a usable amount of ice. The task required control rather than speed. Ice that had been packed into a solid body now had to be separated again, piece by piece. The bucket waited to receive what the pick released. Rope, chair, tool, and container formed a small system inside the larger one. The architecture had kept the ice. Now labor made it available. Nothing in this scene requires an invented hero. The human presence comes from weight and repetition, the pull of the rope, the balance of the chair, the resistance of the ice, and the careful transfer into the bucket. Far above, summer light remained near the entrance. Down in the chamber, a winter store was being opened in measured amounts. The bucket began its return toward the passage. Its load was smaller than the winter blocks that had once entered the building, but it carried the result of months of storage. The pulley turned as the rope tightened. Hands above guided the weight. Below, the worker prepared another portion or waited to be raised. The same vertical space that made storage deep now shaped every movement of retrieval. The people at the opening had to work together. One pair of hands could steady the rope, while another received the rising bucket. A pause in the movement allowed the load to settle. Then the final distance could be covered without striking the passage wall or spilling pieces back into the chamber. At the top, ice passed into the narrow route toward daylight. Doors opened only as needed. Each threshold still mattered, even during use. The chamber could not remain exposed longer than the work required. This was how preservation met daily demand. The ice house held a large seasonal reserve, but the household received it in smaller quantities. A bucket created the link between the mass below and the rooms above. The routine may have been repeated many times through the warmer part of the year. Lower the chair. Break the ice. Fill the bucket. Raise the load. Move it through the passage. Close the doors again. The sequence was practical, steady, and built around care. We cannot recover the exact pace of one retrieval or the private thoughts of the people doing it. We can see their skill in the arrangement they used. The system depended on workers who understood the chamber, the tools, and the value of limiting waste. As the bucket reaches the entrance, the stored winter crosses another boundary. It leaves the deep room and enters the summer estate, one measured load at a time. Beyond the ice house, the load continued toward the household. Stored ice supported food preservation and the cooling of drinks, bringing the work of winter into the routines of warmer months. This cold was limited and physical. It did not flow endlessly from a machine. Every piece had been formed by weather, gathered by workers, protected underground and lifted back out. Once removed, it began melting more quickly. That made each load part of a chain of decisions. How much was needed? How soon would it be used? How could it be carried without wasting what had taken months to preserve? The household's comfort rested on attention at every earlier stage. Food that benefited from cooler conditions could be kept longer. Drinks could be served cold during warm weather. These uses connected the dark chamber to ordinary life inside the estate buildings. The movement also connected groups of workers whose tasks happened at different times. Winter crews gathered and packed the store. Others maintained access and handled retrieval. Household workers received and used the ice. The whole process crossed seasons as well as spaces. By the time a piece reached a kitchen or serving area, the pond and the underground chamber were out of sight. Yet both remained present in its cold. The summer household was using something made by winter and preserved through months of quiet labor. The ice did not stay long above ground. It gave up the cold the building had protected, then returned to water. Its brief household use completed a journey that had begun on a frozen pond. The ice house tied the estate to a seasonal calendar. Winter was the time to watch the ponds and gather what the cold provided. Spring was a season of closed doors and careful waiting. Summer brought retrieval and use. Then the cycle turned toward winter again. No 2 years had to unfold in exactly the same way. The supply depended on local weather, and winter could not be commanded. People prepared the building, watched conditions, and worked when the opportunity arrived. This rhythm joined places that might otherwise seem unrelated. A pond at the edge of the grounds, a buried chamber, a passage with several doors, and rooms inside the household all became parts of one seasonal system. The workers moved through that calendar as well. In winter, labor traveled toward the ice house with heavy loads. In summer, smaller quantities traveled away from it. The direction changed, but the route between landscape and household remained. Above ground, the estate followed the present season. Grass grew, trees leafed out, and warm days returned. Below ground, material gathered earlier remained available. The chamber allowed 2 seasons to overlap without making either one disappear. Careful use helped the reserve last. Every trip inside disturbed the protected space. Every load taken out reduced what remained. The routine balanced household needs against a supply that could not be replaced until cold weather returned. Seen across a full year, the ice house becomes more than a hidden room. It is a calendar built into the estate, marking time through gathering, waiting, retrieval, and renewal. Some details have disappeared with the people who once worked here. No name survives for the worker lowered in the chair. The exact construction year of the Ashridge Ice House is not known, though it belongs to the setting of the estate as early 19th century rebuilding. We cannot know the precise temperature inside the chamber on a particular summer day. No account preserves the exact pattern of light, the sound of the pulley, or the feel of the air during one retrieval. Those details are lost, but the process is clear. The building itself gives us the durable outline. A narrow passage led through several doors. A deep tapering chamber lay beneath a dome. Earth and cavity construction helped separate the store from summer heat. Drainage openings released meltwater. Ice and snow arrived from local sources. A pulley chair, pick and bucket made retrieval possible. This boundary between knowledge and imagination does not weaken the journey. It leaves room for the past to remain past. We can follow the architecture and the labor without assigning a voice to someone whose words were never recorded. The unnamed worker becomes present through action rather than biography. His hands manage the rope. His weight settles into the suspended chair. His pick meets the packed ice. These are careful images of a documented process, not claims about one individual life. What survives is the shape of the system and the work it required. The missing details remain quiet around that shape, like the darkness beyond the reach of a doorway. After the load had passed through, the doors could close again. The passage returned to stillness. The rope relaxed, the pulley stopped, and the remaining ice settled into the protected chamber below. This quiet reset was part of the daily logic of the place. Retrieval interrupted storage, but only for as long as necessary. Each closed threshold restored a layer between the ice and summer air. The worker's route also returned to the surface. Boots moved back along the passage. Tools were left ready for another visit. The bucket continued toward the household, carrying a small piece of the reserve with it. Behind the doors, the system resumed its slower work. Earth, masonry, depth, and the compact mass of ice continued to delay melting. Water found its way out through the drainage arrangement. Days passed above the chamber. The repeated opening and closing of the ice house gave summer a rhythm. Enter, retrieve, leave, protect. Each visit connected immediate need with months of preparation. Each closing preserved what future visits would require. There is something restful in the return to order. The active sounds of rope and tools give way to a building that works without movement. The chamber holds what remains. The passage waits. The lawn outside continues under warm light. Soon, we will follow that light back across the estate. For now, the last door settles into place, and winter is once again enclosed beneath the ground. The path outward reverses the descent. The deep chamber falls behind. The narrow passage leads toward the entrance, and daylight slowly widens at the end of the route. Outside, Ashridge is still in summer. The lawns remain warm. The trees still hold their leaves, and the buried room gives almost no sign of the winter stored beneath them. The contrast that opened our journey is now easier to understand. The ice house belongs to this landscape because every part of its work began here. Local weather froze the ponds. Estate workers gathered the ice and carried it across the grounds. The chamber protected it. Other workers brought it back out. The household gave the stored cold a purpose. Most of that effort remained away from display. The building sat largely underground. Labor happened in winter weather, inside a confined passage, and over the dark opening of the chamber. Summer comfort arrived after the hardest work had already been completed. From the surface, the entrance appears modest again. It no longer needs to reveal everything. We know the depth beyond it, the mass that once filled the room, and the repeated journey of rope and bucket. The estate stretches outward toward pond, woodland, and house. What seemed like separate places now form a single map. Winter moved from water to chamber. Summer drew it from chamber to household. People carried the seasons between them. As we step away from the doorway, the hidden room remains where it was, enclosed by earth, and quietly holding whatever ice is left. Evening light begins to soften across the estate. The pond that supplied winter ice lies elsewhere in the landscape. The household rooms that used it stand beyond the trees. Between them, almost hidden, the ice house keeps its place beneath the ground. Across the year, hands kept returning to the same quiet route. In winter, heavy loads moved from the pond toward the chamber. In summer, the pulley turned the other way, lifting smaller portions toward the household. Between those journeys, closed doors and patient masonry held the seasons apart. No single moment tells the whole story. The meaning rests in the rhythm between seasons and in the hands that kept that rhythm moving. Above ground, summer continues without interruption. Warm air crosses the grass. Leaves settle into the fading light. Below, masonry and earth surround the remaining store. The two seasons never meet as equals. Summer fills the visible estate, while winter survives only in the carefully protected depth of the chamber. Yet the smaller season below can still reach upward. It can travel in a bucket, pass through the shaded entrance, and briefly cool a room far from the pond where it began. The ice house never stopped summer from arriving. It did something quieter. It kept a small part of winter within reach. That winter had begun as weather on local ponds. It became weight in a worker's hands, a solid mass in the chamber, a bucket rising through darkness, and finally a measure of cold carried toward the household. Now the passage is empty. The doors are closed. The pulley is still. And beneath the warmth of Ashridge, winter waits a little longer.